everyone, in today's video I'll be showing you how I drew these flowers using fine liners. Now all the supplies that I've used will be listed in the description box below if you'd like to see what were the supplies that I'm actually using here. But basically you just need a fine liner, an eraser and a graphite pencil. That's basically it. So what I'm doing now is I'm sketching out the flowers that I chose for the first spread. Now the first spread I'm going to do the entire spread. I'm going to sketch out all the flowers and then do the inking. And with the second spread of flowers, I'm going to do each flower individually, the sketch and inking for each flower. So I'm starting off with the sketch, as I said, and this is basically to serve as a guideline. So it's just for me to copy, and even if things I may change them around when I start using the fine liner, but I just want a guide when I start working in with the ink. You don't have to include too much of detail at this stage. I'm just including the basic shapes of the petals and where they are and where the stamen is, as well as the stem, just to make sure that I can see where everything goes. Then I start basically outlining my drawing with the fine liner. And initially I just do the outline of the drawing. I'm not really adding any details. I'm following my guided lines and just basically going over with ink. So it's important that you actually get your outlines correct, and then you can start adding your details to each individual petal or to the leaves or to the stem, depending which part of the flower you're working on. So you can see I've done the initial drawing or the initial outline of the sketch that I did initially, and now I'm just starting to add just various lines and strokes just to get those shadows in, and the shadows and some of those shapes and lines on the flower. Now remember, with these drawings I'm not using any color, so I'm not going to be using a gradient color from, say for example, if it's a pink flower, from a lighter pink to a darker pink. I'm only relying entirely solely on the fine liner to get me the highlighted area or to preserve the highlighted area, which is the paper, and get the shadow areas or the darker areas with the fine liner, as well as some of the shapes and designs on the petals. So it's going to be a black and white drawing. So bear that in mind when you are doing these drawings. Although I find these drawings very relaxing to do, and they're also very calming, and actually you learn a lot doing these drawings, and you get a lot of practice in how to control your pen when you're working with these drawings, as well as also doing the initial drawing. You get to practice copying what you see. Basically that's what drawing is. You look at something and you draw it. So it helps you a lot to do flowers. So I would always advise anybody wanting to learn to draw to start off drawing flowers. Flowers, if you do make a little bit of mistakes here and there, it doesn't really show. But if you say for instance you make a petal a little bigger than another, unless it's really significantly bigger, you're not going to really notice it. But if you are drawing, for example, you say you're starting to draw for the first time and you're drawing maybe a giraffe, and you draw one eye bigger than the other eye, it's obviously going to be noticeable, and the proportions are not going to be right, and it's just not going to look right. The eyes in the giraffe, no matter how well you paint it or color it, it's not going to look good. So this is actually a very good exercise to get used to copying what you see, and also get control of using a fine liner, so that you can also experiment with ways that you can use the fine liner in creating dots or lines or cross hatching, just to create shadow areas, to create the patterns and designs on the flowers. So it's all an experimental thing. So it all depends what works for you, but basically the initial sketch is your graphite drawing, and then you just start inking it. After you do the inking of the outlines that you drew on your guide, which is your graphite pencil drawing, then you start adding the details and the shadow areas. But once again, you got to look at your reference photo, because the reference photo will basically guide you as to where certain areas need to be darker, certain areas need to be lighter, and then you as a person viewing it will have to decide how you're going to represent it. So basically you're going to choose, do I want to represent the shadows by a solid color, or do I want to just represent some of the shadows with a maybe cross hatching, or do I just want to add a couple of stippling dots to get a certain area to look darker or lighter? Because remember, when you're using a fine liner to add detail, you depending on that ink on the paper. So it's either solid color, stippling, which is little dots, or it is lines. So you're going to decide how you want to create the shadows. I vary it. Most of the time I'm using lines and cross hatching. But as you can see in this one, I'm using lines, but as well as I'm paying attention to my reference photo and looking at the design of the flower petals themselves. Some of them have got lines on them which are darker in color because these are colored photographs that I'm using. But because I'm not working with color, I have to use a fine liner to define those patterns on the petals. So you can see it's just a back and forth process. I'm going through each one, looking at the reference photo, and then drawing each one or drawing or adding the shadow areas where I feel it needs shadows or where it needs a darker color, just to create that difference in the different areas of the flower and have those shadow areas show, really to make the flower really look three-dimensional or to actually look like the flower. Okay, now there I just added a flower to complete the spread, but I actually don't have footage of that flower. It was a last minute addition, so that's why that flower, unfortunately, I don't have footage of that one. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the second spread. Now, like I said, I'm going to work on the spread flower by flower. So I start off with the sketch. This is a pansy, and I am just starting off with the sketch of the flower, and now I'm working on the center of the flower and I'm going to the petals. I drew the guideline so it gives me an indication, and you can see sometimes I don't follow the guideline. I go out of the lines, I go in the lines. With flowers you don't have to be so precise. You don't have to draw every single petal. You don't have to have them the exact shape. All you need to do is just get them to be as close as possible to look like the flower you're trying to represent. That's it. You don't have to try to get every line in the center, every line of the stamen you want to get. You don't have to get every bit onto paper. You just need to represent it the best way so that when people look at it, they can see, okay, this is a pansy or this is a lily, whichever flower it is that you're drawing. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing here. You will see when I do the initial sketch, I do change it sometimes about when I'm going over with the fine liners, which is perfectly fine. You don't have to keep it the same. Sometimes the initial sketch you do it in a certain way and you're not happy with certain things, you can change it. It's not necessary to keep it that way. And that's the good thing about having the guide. So it's there to show you that, okay, if you're going to ink that area, it may not be looking nice once you start working with the ink. So you're like, okay, am I going to do it that way? I'm going to rather just change the direction of the petal, for example. So now moving on to the next flower. And this one is a lily. Now you can see I'm inking each petal, and some of them I'm changing the direction of the petals. I'm not even keeping the same shape of the petals. And then I'm just even moving the stem about to another position. So you see you can do a lot of changing when you are doing these drawings. You don't have to, or a lot of changes, you don't have to keep it as you did the initial sketch. You don't even need to keep it as the original flower. If you want it to look more simple, you can add less detail. If you want it to look more detailed, you can add more detail, which is adding more lines to represent shadows or patterns or the design on the flowers. And you can see these are very simple. They take practice, but once you get the initial sketch of the flowers, it becomes very easy to use a fine liner. And often people do get scared when you are using fine liners because it's permanent. So once you go on to your paper, you're not going to be able to correct mistakes. Try it out. If you don't try it out, you're not going to get the practice and you're not going to be able to advance your skills and get used to using fine liners. Because using the fine liners helps you to gain control of using ink, and that gives you better control when you are drawing. So that's actually a good exercise to do. Another tip just to remember, when you are doing the flowers and the drawings, when you're erasing them, make sure that the ink is completely dry. Different pens or different fine liners dry at different rates. and depending on the amount of ink you've put on, if you put the heavy layers or thick layers of paint, it's going to take a bit of time to dry. So try not to put too much of ink onto, try to erase before the ink is dry. So let it dry and then move on to the next one. So that's just a little tip, just to avoid you smudging and ruining your drawing, because as I said, this is permanent. Once you put it on, it's basically not going to erase. So try to just avoid smudging by letting it dry before you erase. So you can see now, as I'm moving from flower to flower, I am not really copying everything. I'm adding some petals that I want to add. I'm changing the shape of the leaves. You can see here there were leaves on the top in the photograph that I used. That's what I drew with a graphite pencil. But when I came actually to start inking it, I realized that that does not look right. I want the leaves only at the bottom. Those leaves were from the background of the photo, and they were not just fitting in according to my illustration. So I decided to leave it. So that's what you have as an artist. You have that choice. You can add what you want to add and leave what you want to leave. So if you don't want it exactly the way it is in the photo, you can change it. If you want to change the petals to a different angle, you can do that. It's entirely up to you. And when you're drawing flowers, remember, you don't have to have them exactly as they are. You can change them. Flowers are something that, or a subject that are so simple and easy to draw and to change, and they still look like a flower. If you draw the petals, like point the petals at the corners, they still look like a flower. If you round them around the edges, they still look like a flower. So it doesn't really make a difference if you change it about. It depends on what you want and how you want your final drawing to look, what you want it to look like. So as you can see, I'm working with the layer of pencil. Then I'm going over with the fine liner, with the outline of the pencil drawing, and then only I start doing the addition of the lines for the shadows, depending on where it is, and even adding some areas of more solid color of the black fine liner, just to make sure that those areas are completely covered for shadows in between the different petals or in between the leaves, depending what I'm doing. Also, you can pay close attention to the lighting. Certain areas where the light is hitting, obviously that will retain a lot of the paper or white of the paper, and with certain areas where it's darker, those areas, or in the parts of the flowers that are in shadows or the leaves that are in shadows, those you would now use your fine liner to create that cross-hatching or lines, just to create that shadow effect. You see, I'm adding things, I'm changing them about. If I don't like a thing, I change it. And that's the good thing about having the guide, because you can already see what the next step is going to be for you. And if you're not happy with that, you can always decide, I'm going to change it, and I'm not happy with the way that particular section looks, or it's going to look bad when I start inking it. And that's just something you're going to have to decide. And as you practice drawing flowers or drawing any subject matter for that matter, you'll be able to automatically identify what looks good in your eyes and what you find looking more preferable to your drawing and how you want your drawing to look. And remember, if you're doing a spread like this and a particular flower doesn't come out the way you want to, try to correct it if you can on the page, but don't scrap the entire page. If you don't like it, all you can do is you can remove that section of the paper or cover it up so you don't see it, or you can even cut the page out and just retain the good parts of it and keep those and stick those onto another page. Remember, you don't have to feel bad if something doesn't come out the way you want it in your sketchbook. The sketchbook is there, or even if you're drawing on drawing paper, it's there for you to learn and to practice. And when you work on it, you're learning something, and if something doesn't work, you learn something from that as well. So never feel disheartened when something doesn't turn out the exact way that you want, because usually you're learning from every experience when you're drawing. Every item you draw, every subject you draw, you're learning something from it. So it's improving your skills all the time. So see with this flower as well, did the initial graphite pencil drawing, and then started adding some of the details and some of the patterns of the petals. Because we don't have color, using the black to represent those darker colors on the petals. If you're looking for longer, slower videos, you can head over to my Patreon page where I offer more in-depth tutorials and lessons, and there are different tiers that have different rewards, so you can head over there. The link will be in the description box down below. So I guess that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, don't forget to like and share. Feel free to comment below and don't forget to subscribe. Till the next one, bye!